Everyone, thanks for coming out to our Roku Talk. I'm Aman, if you don't know me, Professor of Design at UCSD. Today we're really blessed to have 3 members of the Roku design team here with us. I'm going to give you really short introductions, and then they'll talk because they're more important than I am. I'm going to start off, first of all, 2 of them are UCSD graduates. They are UCSD Cognitive Science graduates. You know, a lot of you who are in the program talk about how they got in the program to where they are today. And if this will load. Okay, so we have 2 people here today. First of all, we have Ali. Ali is the user experience vice president at Roku, and he's been a design leader for over 25 years in companies ranging from small startups to over Fortune 100 companies. And our second speaker is Shauna, who's an interaction design manager. She graduated from UCSD with a degree in cognitive science and a minor in computer science. She initially joined Nokia as an interaction designer and a software engineer, and then switched into design later, like a lot of us here did, because that was her true passion. And then our third speaker is Glennis, who is the interaction design lead. She's the UX design lead for the whole home products at Roku, expanding the whole home ecosystem with new products such as the Roku Smart Soundbar. I'll let them talk from here, and thank you guys.
Thank you. So, class of 1990, go back, the first graduating class for CogSci. Stayed in touch with Professor Norman all these years, and he asked me to come and speak to the students and give us kind of an industry perspective on what it takes, you know, when you go from CogSci into the workforce and what lessons have we learned there. And so I invited 2 of my colleagues to join me so that you could get a different perspective. So you got a 1990 graduate perspective, a 93 graduate perspective, and then with Glennis, I wanted to bring in a perspective of somebody who's not from UCSD, but from a different school, different program, but has fantastic industry experience. So just to give you kind of a well-rounded set of comments and feedback and lessons learned.
San Jose State Industrial Design.
San Jose State Industrial Design.
A while ago.
A while ago.
2003.
So what we're going to present to you today is not rehearsed. We don't have lines. It's totally free form. We're going to be tagging and probably walking and talking over each other. So please excuse the informality here. But hopefully we'll have lots of little nuggets of information, some of which will resonate hopefully with some of you. And let's keep it super informal. If you have a question, you don't have to wait till the end. Pop your hand up and we'll talk about it right then and there. If it's a big topic, maybe we will save it till the end. If it's something we're going to address a little bit later on, we'll certainly tell you about that as well. All right, we'll get started. So, obviously, this is going to sound pretty reasonable, right? Your experiences kind of set you on a certain path, and once you're on a path, believe it or not, at least within industry, sometimes it's really hard to change paths. So the point of us being here today is to make sure that we can give you some advice, some things, some food for thought, some set of considerations that as you're getting ready to leave school and enter into the job market, hopefully you can reflect on some of the things that we're going to share with you, and you can make some more conscious, deliberate set of choices to make sure that your career goes in the direction that you want it to go, and that you're not just a passenger, so to speak, on your own set of experiences, right? A lot of people just simply go from job to job or do whatever they're told at the company they're working for, and they literally, believe it or not, it seems strange to say it, but they just kind of become a passenger in their own career. It just goes wherever it takes them. Very few people have actually sat down and thought and reflected on, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to be 5 years from now? And made a series of conscious, deliberate choices and decisions to make sure that they're going in the direction they want to go in. It sounds strange. You'd say, well, who wouldn't have control over their lives? Well, it happens. The system will suck you in, and you will end up becoming a passenger if you're not careful and not thinking about what you're doing every day and why you're doing it, and should you be doing something differently or better, or in what direction. And you guys can jump in and say, add whatever you want to add. Okay, so here's the topics. We're going to keep it simple, and we're going to try not to bore you to death. We're going to talk about the different types of companies that are out there and things for you to consider when you think about perhaps where to work or who to work for. And some insights and hints and tips when it comes to interviewing, right, for a job somewhere, anywhere. And then, of course, we'll save a majority of the time, if possible, for Q&A. But please talk about or raise your hand, and we'll be happy to answer any questions along the way. All right, so let's talk about companies. So one of the first things you should consider is perhaps the size and type of company that you want to work for. This is important because when you think about these different factors, it makes a difference. So let's talk about the role. So when you think about perhaps a small company, maybe it's a startup, or you're thinking of a large company, maybe it's something, behemoth like a Microsoft or SAP or Apple or something big like that. Or maybe it's a certain type of company. Maybe it's more like a consultancy or an agency or a service as opposed to a company that produces products or something. The type of company, the size of the company that you pick can actually affect your role within that company. For example, if you go into a much smaller company has smaller resources. They try to get more mileage out of each person, right? So they're looking for somebody who can be a jack of all trades, somebody who can cover more ground. If you go into a company as a designer, they're going to expect you to do end-to-end design. From the very, very beginning, carrying it all the way through the entire product development cycle, all the way into the very end where the product ships. And if that's something that appeals to you, then maybe a small company is a great place for doing something like that. A larger company is going to look for more of a specialist, right? They're well established, they've got great tools, great processes, they got lots of resources, they got lots of people, and they're looking for somebody to come in who has this area of expertise, right? And they're looking for an expert in that one area. And your role and your responsibility is going to be somewhat limited to perhaps just that one focus or that one area, right? So for example, if you're a designer in a small company, you might have to do the research yourself up front to better understand kind of the end user and their problems, translate that into some sort of concept, and then work with engineers to kind of create out the design and then spec it and build it and et cetera, et cetera. If you work for a much larger company, someone else is going to probably do the research. It's going to be the information is going to be shared with you. You might do a little bit of the design. Someone else will prototype. Someone else will usability test it. And then maybe even someone else will document the design, right? And you'll play a much more narrow role. Now, I'm not saying this is true in all cases. It's certainly different in lots of different companies. It just depends on how they're structured and how they're organized. But the key to remember is be picky with the company that you go to, right? Be deliberate in your choice. Small company, large company, what are you looking for, right? Anything to add on the role? No? You'll just jump in? Okay.
I just think it's important to also, whether it's a big company or a small company, look for mentorship there.
Yes.
I think that's a big thing to find. If you're going into design, hopefully there's product management or good design mentor there, senior designer, and if not, look for mentors outside.
Yeah, and that'll take us to the growth one as well. So another big difference when it comes to size or type of company is the impact you're going to have. For someone who's been in the design field for over 25 years, I've found that my definition of happiness and success has actually changed based on my experience. First, getting a job was considered success. And then after I had a job and was doing all sorts of great work, then my idea of success changed, and then I went and looked for a different job doing something else, and then my definition of happiness changed. And at the end of the day, kind of later in my career, I found that what I was really looking for was an opportunity for impact. I wanted the things that I was doing to make a difference. And so if that's important to you, if your opportunity for impact is important to you, once again, the type of company you're going to go to, that'll make a difference in your ability to have an impact, either on that company or on the industry. So by example, I was working at Microsoft on Xbox, and I got to work on Kinect, right? So for 2 years, I'm sitting there designing air gestures and voice-based stuff and doing some really innovative stuff, which had a kind of a big impact on the industry, but it didn't even move the needle for Microsoft. I mean, the company made millions of dollars, and if Xbox were a different company all by itself outside of Microsoft, it would have made Fortune 100, right? But inside Microsoft, it was like a drop in the bucket. It didn't raise an eyebrow, like all that success, and it wasn't their cash cow, right? I mean, they were focused on Windows and Office and everything else, and so here I was, working on something that I thought was revolutionary and would change the world, yet, and the stock price didn't even tick up like by $1, right? It was amazing to think that you almost had zero impact on the company. But yet, you go work at a much smaller company, obviously you're going to be playing a bigger role, you're going to be doing a lot more, and the opportunity for you to have an impact on that company is a lot more. So think about whether you're looking for an impact on the industry, or if you're looking for an impact on the company, or if you're looking for an impact on the team, right? So I was a small fish in a big company, and hopefully the product we put out had an impact on the industry, but not on the company. Went to a much smaller company, worked for a small startup. My role covered a lot of territory, but the impact on the company was huge. Every person in the company made a big difference in the success or failure of that company, but being a much smaller company and the type of product we were working on, it wasn't going to change the world or change the industry, right? So think about impact. As Glenn has pointed out, growth, right? So the type of company you join is going to impact your own personal growth, right? So here's a danger or a trap a lot of people fall into. They go into a much smaller company because they want that exposure to a role that will expose them to greater work, right? Yeah, I want to do everything. I want to do the research, and I want to do the design, and I want to do the testing, and I want to be involved in the entire process from end to end. And that's great, right? But given that it's a smaller company, chances are it may just be you. You may be the only designer in that company. And so the question becomes, well, who's going to mentor you? Who's going to be your peer to review your design work and tell you whether you're doing it well or what area that you need to develop on? Who's going to critique your work? If you're working with an engineer, and we've interviewed a lot of people, a lot of great people who've come from other smaller companies, and they say, oh, I'm a great designer. We're like, okay, well, let's look at your work. And then we look at it and we're like, well, who have you been learning from? Who's been coaching you? Who's been telling you what method or process or tool or what to do or when to do it? And they're like, well, the engineers say I'm a great designer, and the product managers say that I'm a great designer. And I'm like, yeah, but what are their qualifications? How do they know great design from bad design, right? And so if you're missing that coaching, if you're missing that kind of peer-to-peer critiquing, if you're not getting that, then you're getting experience certainly working for a company, but how you grow in your skill and in your craft could be potentially limited. You're going to get experience, you're going to get exposure, you're going to do end-to-end stuff, but there is value in having other designers and having someone with more experience than you looking over your shoulder and kind of guiding you and coaching you. You get a lot of that at bigger companies. Bigger companies, more resources, more designers, a lot more critiquing, a lot more peer reviews, but maybe the scope of your work is narrow, right? There's no one ideal place. I don't have like the answer for you to tell you what's the best solution. It's a lot of trade-offs. You make one decision, you're going to get something really good, but you're going to miss out on something else. So at the end of the day, it's a very personal decision for you, like what's more important to you, right? Glynis mentioned the mentoring, right? Peer and guidance, the exposure we kind of talked about. At a smaller company, your career could grow faster. You could grow with the company. As it grows and hires more people, chances are, if you're doing a good job or they think you're doing a good job, you could grow with the company, and maybe you get promoted to manager and you get to hire in the next person, and then you get promoted again and you get to hire in other people, right, to bring them in. So at a small company, I think the potential, certainly while it's very much dependent on your own ability, but the potential seems to be there, right, to continue to grow with the company. You come in with a much larger company, and it'll probably take a while. And I'm stereotyping a little bit here. There's always exception cases, but your career may not advance as fast compared to a small company, assuming the small company lasts long enough for your career to advance with them. Anything else on that? I'll jump ahead. Think about the product maturity. If you go into a larger, well-established company, what product are you going to be working on? Are you going to be working on the 29th version of something? Or are you going to go into a small company where it's version 1 of something? Or maybe it is a larger company and they're doing kind of a new to the world or new to the company version of a product. But think about that for a second. Like, what product are you going to be working on? Once again, are you helping to refine and maintain an existing product, or are you going to be working on something that's V1, right? And there's a huge difference there. If you're working on something that's already established, it's got history, it's got legacy, it's got constraints, it's already got a huge audience of users potentially, and what you can do is going to be more evolutionary, probably less revolutionary. A little more constrained, perhaps, I don't want to say dull, but a little less innovative, perhaps. If you get to work on a version 1, and I highly recommend it if you ever get the opportunity, it's cool. It's cool because you're working on the first version of something, and there's an entirely different way of thinking about that and prioritizing what to do and what's most important and what are we going to ship with and what is our goal and when will we ship. And usually a version 1 of a product is less tied to a schedule than it is to certain quality and goal objectives, because it's not like the marketplace is expecting it, right? It's the version 1 of something. And so the opportunity to delay it and get it right seems to be a little bit better with a V1 than, let's say, a product where everybody's expecting a new release every fall or something like that, right? Where it's already on a cadence, and then there's this pressure and this rhythm of, okay, every fall we got to release something, or every 6 months we got to update something, or every quarter, or if it's a web-based product, every day, every week. Lots to be learned from V1 type products. I'm going to go back on something I just remembered. When it comes to growth, one of the things we talked about was exposure. Different types of exposure, by the way, with different companies. When you're with a smaller company, your interactions with other departments and other disciplines are going to be more personal and one-to-one, and there's going to be more exposure to these different departments. Right? So let's say, once again, you're the sole designer at a small startup. You're going to be working directly hand in hand with engineers, with product managers, with marketing, with copywriters. It's a more close-knit team, and you work more with these departments. When I reflect back on my experience at bigger companies, and Glynis, you can chime in, and with Nokia as well. When I think back on the interactions I had with bigger companies, it was certainly with engineering, a little bit with marketing, not a lot, and maybe a little bit with some product managers. So it was a huge company with all these resources in different departments, but everybody was so specialized at what they were doing, there was a lot of handing over the wall type of experiences. Smaller companies, it's much more intimate. You're working directly. You can get a better feel for what is the role of a product manager and how do I, as a designer, work with a product manager? What is the role of marketing and how do I work with them and be involved and more closely collaborate? I think those opportunities sometimes present themselves more either in a small company or in a big company that's working on small projects, right? They got smaller teams working on those types of things. What was your experience like at Intuit?
Did you have exposure to a lot of different departments, and was the collaboration close?
Yeah, it depended on which product vertical I was in. I started out in personal finance, and that was very tight-knit group of people. We were large, but we had very tight product and feature teams, and the cross-pollination was very fluid. But then I went over to the payroll group, and that was, there were walls.
Yeah.
And it just presents new challenges. You have to be the one to go out and start creating the relationships and talking to people and creating the collaboration points and those sorts of things. So just take the reins.
Yeah. How was it at Nokia?
So I had two different opportunities at Nokia. One was similar to Glennis's, where it was a big company where you only work in a small group. Right, and then you could collaborate with your engineers and maybe you touch a little bit with the marketing, but we didn't know about the other verticals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be intimidating for somebody who's new, who's just starting at a job to go and make those relationships, right? You may not even know whom to go talk to. You don't even know that the other design departments exist or other verticals. So I think that can be a challenge that you need to maybe overcome by having a mentor and then somebody who's been at the company for a while so they can point you and introduce you to those departments.
Were you going to talk about centralized versus integrated design teams? Especially at large, because I think that has a really big impact as well. And it depends on how the company uses the centralized design team or the integrated design teams.
Go for it.
So I've been, when I first started at Intuit, we had a centralized design team that was not very effective because of the walls that were put up there. And it made things very challenging and difficult. I was there for a long time. And so we went through lots of different organizations of what do we do with UX? And so we went from centralized, and I said, okay, this wasn't working so well, because we ended up just kind of polishing off the product.
When you say centralized, can you explain what you mean?
I'm sorry. So one centralized UX group for all of the product verticals within the company. And I think at the time we had 6 different product verticals. And I think that TurboTax was the only one that had their own design team down here at the time. So integrated means that the design teams get split out and then fully integrated into these product verticals. And that's when I got fully integrated into personal finance, when I was working elbow to elbow with the engineers that are working on Quicken and on all the products that we did there. So that's a very different experience. But it kind of depends on the organization. You have to get a feel for it. It was not very functional to have a centralized design team there. But right now at Roku, we have a centralized design team. And it's very functional. It works very well for us for many reasons. One of them is that we actually, we all have the vision into what's happening with our products. And it's across all of the UX team members. And that's very big. So we make sure there's no duplication of effort. We make sure that everything that we design and we do for the product that we're working on, we've shared it with the other designers, and they can then leverage it. So it's, but we also are elbow to elbow. We're doing kind of it almost feels like a hybrid, but we're technically centralized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Roku, she's right. We are a centralized design team. The members of our design team are kind of focused on particular products or domains or verticals. So they can develop relationships with the engineers and the product managers and the people working in the same domain. They can build up domain expertise. They can build up industry expertise within that domain. But because we're centralized, we support each other. we get the bigger picture view, and that enables us to make sure that whatever we design kind of has a unified, coherent, branded experience. That way, the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, right? And you don't end up with different design teams creating different things all under the same brand, and a consumer that sees it all goes, wait a minute, this doesn't fit with that, why is this different from that? So being centralized kind of gives us that perspective, that opportunity to kind of view things and make sure that it all feels like it's coming from one designer rather than 6 different designers or 6 different teams. It also, I think, gives us more power within the company, a bigger voice, bigger presence, more visibility. It also allows us to create hierarchy and career growth. So if you go to a company that has just a lot of different smaller design teams, right? Cells, like Spotify has cells, right? Amazon, if you go and interview there, they hire people to work specifically on projects. Even though they might have a VP, designers all work on different products and they're not centralized. They don't support each other necessarily. And the problem is, okay, well, what does your career growth look like, right? If you're just tied to that one project, right? If you have a centralized design team, right, rather than having 20 people split up into teams of 2, you now have a team of 20. Well, a team of 20 requires managers, it requires leads and managers and directors and a VP, and it creates hierarchy so that you can have mentoring and coaching and different levels of responsibilities. And then that creates career opportunity, career growth, right? So for somebody who wants to go in the management path or individual contributor but still have room to grow. It gives us exposure to more design disciplines. So if you go look at a company like Spotify or an Amazon, because they have these cells or these individual teams, once again, they're looking for a jack of all trades. They're looking for somebody to step in who can do everything from beginning to end. You step into a team that's more centralized, you can have specialized skills, but at the same time, you can learn from other people who have specialties, right? So somebody who has an interaction design superpower can learn from somebody who has a visual design superpower or an animation or audio design or something else, right? And that's what we do. When we hire, we try to look for a person who's going to bring something new to the team that we don't already have and that the rest of us can kind of learn from. That becomes a big plus for us when we're considering who to hire.
Just one more thing to
Yeah.
add about being centralized. It also gives us an ability to assess the designer's skill set and let them move maybe between these verticals easier. They don't need to go meet yet another manager, another VP, and then show
Reapply, interview.
Reapply, interview, but rather they're on our team, and then we can say, okay, you fit better here, or do you have a desire to move to another, to do something else because you've been in this role for 2 or 3 years. So
Yeah.
that's
So movement is easier within the centralized.
movement within the team.
Good. Once again, feel free if you've got questions or comments to raise your hand. We're happy to address it as we go. Risk. There's perhaps a misconception that if you join a small startup that there's greater risk, that your job might be at greater risk. They may shut down tomorrow and then you'll be out on the street again interviewing. That's what I used to think when I entered the job market. I'm going to stay away from those small companies. They're not well established. They could shut down tomorrow. The first day on the job, when I went with a big company, they were announcing layoffs. I showed up first day at work and they're like, we're doing layoffs, like 20% of the workforce is being laid off. So your job security is not necessarily any more or less assured just because it's a small or big company. If you're going to go for a small company, try to figure out how well funded they are, right? If they're not going to last, it's probably, of course it has to do with the quality of their product and services, but if they're well funded, at least they're not going to run out of money, right? And you don't have to worry about that. But don't think that you've got great job security just because you're joining a Microsoft or an Intuit or something like that. These companies routinely, every now and then, go through a layoff period. They've hired and hired so quickly and gotten so big, all of a sudden they realize that they've got way too many people and they're not focused enough and something has to change, and then they end up going through some sort of a layoff or some sort of a transformation that might result in a layoff. I had a very close and talented coworker of mine, friend of mine, best in the industry, just super, super talented guy, can land a job anywhere. He went to a big company. I won't mention their name. I'm not trying to disparage companies. He went to a big company, and the thought was that this company is so big and they've got so many different projects and so many different initiatives that if the project he went on or the department he joined, if that was going to get shut down, he could easily just go anywhere else. Well, that's exactly what happened to him. The project he joined did shut down. And they basically said, well, you got 30 days to go find another project, right, to see who will want you or who will accept you, otherwise you're out. And just maybe it was bad timing, who knows what, but smart and as good as he was, he couldn't find another project that he was interested in and that had an opening and that they needed him. And this huge, huge company, he was out. And then of course he quickly went and found a job somewhere else. But what a loss for them, and what a bad experience for him. So don't, when you're thinking that you got job security at a big company, it's not always true. It's a different type of security, right? But layoffs happen, projects shut down, departments get shut down. It could happen anywhere. It's just a different type of risk versus a small company. All right. When you're thinking about which company to join, also think about the domain. I don't know if this is necessarily the right word, but think about what area that company's in, right? And the reason why this is important is, once again, it's going to set you down a path, and either you're going to be very happy in that path, or you're going to find it very difficult to get off of that path if you're not happy. And what I mean by domain is, for example, is the company that you're interviewing with part of the financial industry, or is it transportation, or is it medical, or is it education, or is it military, or is it finance and taxes, or is it telephony or communication? The domain that you enter and the experience that you gain within that domain either becomes extremely valuable in terms of the next job, right? So another company looking for somebody who already can come in and hit the ground running, right? If you've been in education for 5 years and now you're going to switch to another company and you're trying to switch to medical all of a sudden, that's pretty tough, right? Companies are looking for people with domain knowledge and domain expertise. It's a lot easier for us. I'll give you an example for us, for Roku. When we're looking at two candidates and one happens to have experience with TV UI and the other one doesn't, yeah, chances are the person with the TV UI probably has a leg up and is going to get the job. They can come in and hit the ground running. So think about the domain that you want to go into, right? Don't just accept a job with a company that's big or reputable or it might look like it's fun, right? Like, yeah, let's go for YouTube or let's go for eBay. Big companies, everybody uses them. My friend uses them. My family knows about it. But remember what you're entering into. If you go into eBay, you're dealing with e-commerce, right? And web. And is that the domain you want to be in? Because once you're in that, it might be a little bit harder to all of a sudden transfer that domain knowledge and switch and go somewhere else, right? When I came out of college here, UCSD, I was interviewed by all the different military organizations around here, and they were trying to get me to join them because they were investing in all this great tech, right? Imagine back in 1990 being recruited by Pendleton because they were going to be doing VR, right? So that commanders could be sitting here looking at troop movements with VR type stuff. And I'm like, oh, virtual reality, that's awesome. And then I stopped and thought, and I'm like, oh wait, this is military though, right? It's like, what's the thing with military? Well, you're going to be working on projects for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then they might get shelved. You can't talk about it when you want to go interview anywhere else. Your friends and family are never going to hear about it or see it. And they move at a slightly different pace, and there is tons of paperwork in everything you do. Everything has to be documented up the yin-yang. You wouldn't believe it, right? It's crazy. It's a different world. Enterprise. If you're going to go join a company where they're doing enterprise-type products, we're talking about Slack, or you're talking about Atlassian with Jira or Confluence, or when you get into enterprise, sometimes it can be hard to transfer into another company that's working on commercial products for consumers Because enterprise, once again, has a different set of considerations, a different set of, a different way of working. And maybe they're working with keyboard and mouse, and now all of a sudden you're trying to do consumer products where it doesn't involve keyboard and mouse. It's a remote control and a TV screen or something completely different. As much as we're open to it, it's been really tough for candidates who come into us and they come from a different domain, and we look at their philosophy and their approach to problem solving and their process. They've been in another domain so long, they've kind of become a little bit institutionalized in terms of how to think and how to work that's specific to that domain, and it just doesn't carry over well to us. And if we're not the type of company that can invest or reinvest in you and say, yeah, we'll give you 6 months or a year and we'll invest in you and train you and this and that, I don't know how many companies are doing that anymore. They want you to come on board and hit the ground running because they got projects to do and deadlines to meet. So once again, if you go into automation and you want to get into cars and self-driving cars, or if you're going to go into whatever it is, whatever domain you're going to get into, think about that. And is that a domain you love and the domain you want to spend a lot of time in and develop an expertise in and have it become a niche for you, right? And you will become super valuable in that domain. People will hire you because of your expertise in that domain. But sometimes it's really hard to escape that domain and change it if it's not something you love, right? So just be considerate in your decision making.
It's not impossible.
It's not impossible.
It's just hard.
It's hard, yes.
Again.
Yes, it's not impossible. It's hard. If you're lucky, if you find the right job, the right opportunity, the right hiring manager who wants to give you that opportunity, they see something else, right? Yes, that's awesome, and it's been known to happen.
Also, we don't always necessarily have a choice. Today, I think we have a lot more choice, right? There are a lot more jobs, and we can be a little bit picky and say, okay, my passion is in TV, so I'm going to go and work there. But if back when I got out in 2003, I didn't really have a choice. It was basically there were no jobs, right? And so Nokia kind of fell in my lap. I didn't pick Nokia because I loved mobile phones.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's also
Mm-hmm.
that trade-off, right? It's like you would have to, sometimes you have to start somewhere and then find your way around, right?
Right. Yeah, it's not just if there's no choice and you're just going to take what's available, that's great. But once you're in, start your planning, start your conscious decision making. How long am I going to stay? What am I going to do? What do I want to learn from this so that it can be applicable to the next thing that I want to do, et cetera, et cetera. Don't become a passenger and just let it take you wherever it goes. Be kind of in the driver's seat of your own career and decide for yourself what you want. Question, yes? Thank you for being brave and asking the first question.
So, have you ever hired someone from a different domain and explain the reasoning, what made them stand out?
What made them stand out? So here at Roku or just ever?
Ever.
Yes.
Yeah. So she's a good example. So we hired her into Roku. She came from Intuit, and so clearly not necessarily related domain. Both consumer-facing products, but more perhaps enterprise versus kind of entertainment, right? But what we saw in her was somebody who had very, very strong kind of a foundation and philosophy and the strong fundamentals of design thinking and design process. And we knew that Intuit had a great reputation for design. And so even though the product space didn't match ours, we thought it was perfectly great to bring in somebody who could add to our team and help with our design culture and our design thinking. So we were willing to take that chance and say, okay, look, it's okay that she has no 10-foot TV experience or consumer product experience that's relevant to our domain, but we really like the strength of the fundamentals of design with her. So we took a chance and it's worked out great so far. That's an easy example, by the way. Much harder examples. We've had some really smart people. We had literally somebody from NASA who was working on some pretty cool stuff, and you were like, why would you want to leave? Like, it sounds great working on that stuff. And it was for a variety of different reasons, right? Like, projects are like 4 or 5 years long, and half the time they get canned or shelved, or things like that. And this person just wanted to be a part of something where they could actually ship something and put it out there faster. And we sat down and we interviewed this person. We're like really impressed with their skill, with their knowledge, right? But once again, their process was tuned to a pace of 3, 4, 5 years, and we're shipping stuff every 6 months, which sounds like a long time, 6 months, but from the time the product, from the time the feature is defined and everybody agrees to it, and then you back off time from the shipping time for QA to do their work and to kind of assess the quality and make sure it's robust enough and performs well enough, and you back off from one end and back off from the other end, you end up with maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks tops to do design end to end. This person just couldn't wrap their head around, how do I do design in 6 weeks, right? So that's some of the dangers, right, of switching or trying to switch from one place to another. Yes?
So kind of going off of what Jana was saying earlier about like trading off, I think you're attracted to design and UX work because you find it inherently meaningful. However, like as we're starting out our careers, we might have to take on some work that is kind of uninspiring. How do you kind of deal with work like that? How do you make it meaningful? That's kind of
That's a good question. I think what Ali was saying before, right, if you don't be the passenger, right, you might take something that's not maybe very fancy, right, or it's not what your friends are doing, or it's not where you want to end up, but make the best out of it, right? See what you can learn, what will differentiate you from the other person on paper when you go to interview, right? And the other question is that the lady in green asked was, why would you hire somebody who doesn't have domain expertise, right? When we look at candidates, we always say we can teach them the domain. We can teach somebody TV or mobile or web, right? But we cannot teach them good design sensibility. So what you learn here, apply that in that role, even if you don't enjoy the work, and try to make the best out of it. Learn, basically. Learn as much as you can so that you can differentiate yourself when you step out and try the next thing.
Find a different aspect of the job that'll inspire you. If it's not the product, then focus on your process. Do I get an opportunity to do research, and can I turn that into synthesis, and can I carry that over into design decision making, and can I carry that then over into great specifications and documents that engineering loves and can turn into and build it, and et cetera, right? Like, the mistake that a lot of candidates make when they come and interview with us is they explain too much about the company and the product. Oh, I was working on this great product, and they go into 10 minutes telling us about this product. I don't care about that product. That's not what you're building for us here. I don't care about that company. What I care about is you. I'm interviewing you. What do you bring to the table? And so we tell the candidates up front, talk about you. Let's hear about your philosophy, your approach to problem solving. Tell me about a situation where you were faced with a particular challenge. How did you overcome it, right? Great piece of advice for all of you. When you're interviewing, everything you say should have 3 points to it, right? What was the situation or the challenge? What was the action you took? And what was the result? Everything you say has to have those 3 points in it. Here was the situation or the challenge that I faced. Here was the actions that I took. And here was the result or the impact that it had, right? Don't just say, oh yeah, I worked on this product and I did some of the research and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, what have I just learned from that statement? Nothing. It's okay to have said, I tried this and did this and it didn't work. The impact was minimal, but here's what I learned from that. I love that as a hiring manager, right? I love knowing that you reflected on your experience to figure out what didn't work and what did you learn from it and what would you do better the next time. You don't always have to be right. You don't always have to be working on the cool thing, right? What is the value of experience? We talk about this all the time. Experience is the things that you do, but the value of that experience is not in the things that you do, it's in the reflection. It's in thinking back on what you did. What did I learn? What would I do differently, right? That's the value of experience. It's not just doing, it's about thinking about what you've done and how would you do it better and what did you learn and how would you do it differently. What worked, what didn't work, what would you change? That's the value of experience, but only if you think about it. If you don't think about it and you're just telling the story of what you did, you're not really getting the full benefit of the experience. So, and we'll get to it in a second, but I'll give you a more robust answer when we talk about these 5 Ps that are coming up. So very quickly, another thing to think about is when you go to a particular company, think about the products and the platforms, right? This is another area where you can develop expertise, right? Are they working on virtual reality and you're going to become the design expert in that space? Are they working on 3D air gestures? Are they working on voice-related stuff? Are they working on touch? The platform on which this company is working or the project that you're going to be working on, it's going to take you a long time to develop expertise in that platform. When you do develop expertise in that platform, you become very valuable to other companies who are looking for expertise on that platform. Because it takes a lot of time and effort, and it's not just easy to hire someone and teach them, oh, let me teach you in half an hour or 1 week or 2 weeks everything we know about touch and what makes for a great touchscreen experience and what doesn't, right? It takes a lot of time. So when you go into a company that has various platforms, pay attention, and is that the platform that you want to develop expertise in and work on for the next, whatever, year, 2 years, 3 years. Hopefully more than a year or 2. Don't be job jumping every year. That doesn't look good on a resume. Okay, let's keep moving. Different roles. So this one's an interesting topic and kind of near and dear to our hearts because having come from UCSD's Cog Sci department, at least for me, back in 1990, there wasn't the term interaction designer. People weren't hiring interaction designers. Nobody had a clue as to what somebody with a Cog Sci degree could offer them or do for them. Thankfully, I had 4 years of CS, and so I went in as a programmer and worked my way into a design department, became their prototyper, and then from there kind of transitioned into design. But the thing that I'll tell you, even now, right, 20-something odd, almost 30-something odd years later, I still meet graduates from the human sciences, whether that be psychology, sociology, anthropology, Cog Sci, doesn't matter what, human factors engineering, and they all still have a very, very hard time convincing their future employer the relationship between human sciences and design. There's still a lot of companies out there, unfortunately, when you say design, they think visual design, they think graphic design, they think industrial design, they think animation, they think sound, but they don't think psychology, they don't think cognitive science, they don't think information sciences, they don't think human factors engineering. The science of design, as we call it, is still something very foreign to them. They don't quite get it. And so what ends up happening is people with these backgrounds who are looking for opportunities with these companies, they end up, whether they want to or not, they kind of end up finding themselves becoming user researchers. And if that's what you want to do, that's awesome. I'm not putting that down as a bad thing. That's a good thing. But if you wanted to be a designer and you found yourself forced into that, then that's obviously not a good thing, right? There are companies out there who will value the skills, the science of design skills. It's just going to be hard to find them, but they're out there. But certainly people with our human sciences background have gone into fields like user research or product managers, right? If you take a little bit of the business side or a little bit of the tech side and bring that with you and take your human sciences kind of background and say, I could be a great product manager. A product manager is a person who literally defines the product a company is going to ship, the features and functions, and prioritizes those and says, this is what we're going to build and ship as a company. They have a great and very important role to play, and if you come with that background of the human sciences, chances are it's going to hopefully lead to a product that's more user-centered, right? And that's going to fit the audience a lot better, right? Its target audience. UX engineers. So we've got more and more engineers that I'm seeing who have some background in human sciences or design, so that when they're actually a front-end engineer for something, or as I'm now learning, CogSci has machine learning and so many other disciplines, engineering-type disciplines. But just that little bit of human-centered kind of thinking and philosophy can go a long ways to making sure whatever it is you're working on is that much more relevant to the target end user, right? We sit down, we participate in our company's new hire orientation. And every week we sit down and talk with a bunch of new hires. And sometimes they're from finance, sometimes they're from HR, sometimes they're engineering, QA, PM, every discipline in the company. And we say, look, it doesn't matter what discipline you're from, because good ideas come from anybody and everybody. Just because we're designers doesn't mean we've cornered the market on good ideas. It's our job to take a good idea and translate it into a good design, right? But good ideas can come from anybody. And so I think this is true too. Like, it doesn't matter what your discipline is, just having that little bit of empathy with the end user is going to help you be that much more critical of problems and ask questions like, why is it like this? Shouldn't it be better? Right? Just asking the right question at the right time and having a higher standard for what's acceptable can have a huge impact. If you do decide to go down the design path, like I said, there's lots of different options, right, in terms of design specialty. You can join companies where they're looking for a jack of all trade. You can become a specialist in one particular thing. It just depends on opportunity, your own drive, your own interest, and what you want to do. But the one thing I will warn you of, when you join a company, that company has a culture. That culture is what the people in that company are already familiar with. It's a way of working, it's a way of thinking, etc. When you join, you are going to be assimilated very quickly into that culture. And if you're not careful, that culture and the people you work with are going to define your job for you. If you come out of this school and you have a very, very clear idea of how to do design, a philosophy, an approach, don't just throw it all away the minute you step foot into a company because they have a culture and a different way of doing things than the way you were taught here. If you throw it all away, shame on you. Don't throw it away. You're learning the cutting edge way of thinking and problem solving. And they're hiring you because you're special and talented and they want you. And yes, when you get in there, it's important to be able to collaborate with other people. And they will have expectations of you and they'll come and tell you. Don't be surprised when they come and tell you how to do your job. Oh, I want this and this and this on my desk by the end of the week. And you're like, what? Like, I thought I was here to do design and you want what? You want this? I didn't know. Well, just what happened to research? What happened to figuring out what the problem is? No. Give me the design by the end of the week and I want it like this. I got to present it to so-and-so. They will come to you in a prescriptive manner and tell you what they want, and they will define your job for you. And the more you say yes and the more you say okay, the more that becomes your job, and you're just reinforcing their mentality of who they think you are and what you should be doing. Stand up. Take a breath and say, what is your goal? What problem are you trying to solve? I will figure out how to address your goal and solve that problem. Don't tell me to deliver this. Don't tell me to deliver that. Now, you're not going to tell them, don't tell me to. But the way of pushing back is getting them to change their language. Have them talk to you in the language of what problem are they solving. Have them talk to you in the language of what's the requirement, what's the goal. You figure out how to achieve the goal. You figure out how to deal with that problem. You figure out how to meet that requirement. When was the last time you walked into your doctor and said, well, I want you to cut right here and open it up and go in this way? You don't just tell your doctor what to do, right? But they will. They will come to you because design is so obvious. Anybody can do it. Here's a whiteboard. I can get up there and draw something. I'm a designer. Anybody can do design. They will come to you and they will be very prescriptive with their solutions. I want you to do this. I want you to design this. I want you to deliver that. It will happen. And when it does, I want you to remember, oh yeah, Jonna, Glennis, and Allie, they were all upstairs and they said this was going to happen. And you might laugh a little. And the person will go, I wonder what they're laughing about. And when that happens, I'll be like, yes, they remembered. Right? And just push back. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll take that into consideration. But tell me, what's the goal? Right? What's the requirement? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Get them to talk in that language, and then you go figure it out. And sometimes you'll have a day, sometimes you'll have a week, sometimes you'll have a month. Who knows, right? You can't control that part of it, but that's also good experience. How to do it in a day, how to do it in a week, how to plan out your activities so that it could work within a month, a week, a day, an hour. You figure it out, right? But get them to change their language when they're talking to you. And when it's time for you to present a design and you're reviewing it with them, they're going to have opinions. Everybody has an opinion about the design, right? And once again, what you want to do is change their language. You're not interested in their opinion of whether they like red or blue or big or small or square or round. What you're interested in is their feedback on how well this design option meets that goal or addresses that problem. And if it doesn't meet that goal or address that problem, in what way is it falling short? And what about this option or that option, right? Change the way they talk about stuff, right? That's what you got to do so you can be in control of your job and do what you've been trained to do, right? They haven't gone to school, they don't have the degree that you do, but they somehow know your job better than you, right? And they've got 10 years industry experience and you're fresh out of school and they're going to tell you how to do your job. Don't let it happen. And if you end up in a place where they're unwilling to change their language and the way they talk, maybe it's not a great place for you to be working in. Be in the driver's seat, start looking for something else. What are you going to learn in a place where somebody who's not a designer is telling you how to do your job? What are you going to do? Show up for your next interview and they're going to say, what did you learn? And you'll say, well, you know, this person taught me how to do design this way. And you're like, okay, no, not going to work. That's a personal passion of mine. My stress level goes up a little when I talk about this. It's good to be the VP sometimes, right? Somebody comes to you and says, do this, and you're like, get out of my office. And then they all go, yeah. All right. Did you guys want to jump in on my soapbox there?
I think that was great. That's actually awesome. So guys, write that down. And the other thing I just want to add is don't forget to ask about who is the user. You're not designing for that person who's telling you how to do the design. Find out who the user is and what are the user's needs. Because at the end of the day, we advocate for the users. And I often tell everybody, we're not the user. Even though we use the product, we're not designing this for us. We're designing it for others, right? So finding out who the user is.
Yeah, you'll sit in design reviews and somebody in the corner will say, yeah, but I do this. And you're like, that's great. Yeah, but my mom would never do that. I'm happy for your mom. That's great. And then you should never say, I think I want to do this or whatever, right? You got to speak for the user, right? I think our users, and that's why personas, right? We create personas. Some people believe in them, some people don't. But it's a great way of getting people to stop saying I. I do this, I do that, I would love it this way. You talk about your persona, Sue or Mary or whoever it is, as a way of getting the rest of the company to stop talking and thinking about themselves and thinking about the end user, right? It's a great device in that case. All right, I'm going to move a little bit faster here. So think about the roles, right? So this may be early, you're coming straight out of school and you're like, okay, you know, do I have to start thinking now about whether I want to be an individual contributor or go down a leadership path or management path? The answer is yes. Think about it instantly, right? Every day you go into work, continue to think about, do I love doing design and being an individual contributor and I just want to go up the ladder that way and I can just stay on the design path? Or do I want to start switching over into a leadership position? And then what kind of leadership, right? There's leadership where you can be leading a project, but you're not responsible for individuals' careers and their problems and things like that. You could be leading projects, or you could then take the management path, and it's a people person type of a leadership. If you do decide, the day comes when you do decide that you want to go down a leadership or management path, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to all of a sudden tomorrow become that lead or that manager. You have to start talking to your existing manager or supervisor and saying, look, this is what I want, and I want you to start throwing me opportunities that help me exercise the right skill sets so I can get that type of a position or job. It's going to sound weird, but your manager or your supervisor cannot read your minds, right? They just simply can't. You have to be very explicit. You have to tell them what you want so that they can create opportunities for you to get that. It's their job to open doors. It's their job to give you opportunities. It's their job to make sure you get the right kind of experiences to give you then the opportunities when they present themselves, right? Be very explicit. But think about it, right? Do you want to do this? Do you want to go down that management path? And believe it or not, the time will come where when you make that decision, the more you go down that management path and the higher you go up that chain, the further and further away you tend to get from hands-on design. And so for me, early on in my career, I went IC, and then I went into management, and then I was like, oh man, all I'm dealing with is other people's problems. Let me just get back to simplicity, and I went back to design. And then I was like, oh, but this environment sucks, and there's no culture, and the leadership is bad. Maybe I should go back into management. I went back into management, and I just kept flip-flopping back and forth, and finally, I just said, okay, I'm going to make a commitment, and I stuck it out on the management path. Because I never found a supervisor or a boss I could respect, that I could learn enough from, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be that person for a team. I'm going to create a team. I'm going to create a culture and an environment, a program that others can really thrive in, right? You'll have your own personal reasons for why you do it. But if you do decide to go down that management path, you have to be a people person, right? You have to be a people person. Your people have to come first. Not the company, not the product, not the process, the people. And you have to learn how to affect success through them. And that is tough to do. When you're a maker, when you're a designer, it's so easy to just do it, but how do you get someone else to do what you're thinking without you doing it yourself? It's tough. I'm still learning. They can attest to that. Interviewing. We're really going to have to move fast. So, believe it or not, when you're interviewing, the interview needs to flow in both directions, right? They're not interviewing you only. You are also interviewing them. You're not looking for a job, you're looking for fit. They're trying to assess whether you're a good fit for them. You should be assessing whether they're a good fit for you. What are you looking for? What are your expectations, right? What questions are you going to ask them to figure out whether they are a good fit for you and what you're looking for? Ask really good questions. If you don't have the opportunity during the interview, do follow-ups. Ask them if you can do follow-ups and emails and phone conversations. Get the answers to your questions. The good questions you ask reflect well on you. We've hired candidates not because they interviewed really well based on the questions that we asked, but because of the questions they asked. We're like, wow, this person's really engaged, they're really smart, they're asking good stuff. The good stuff they're asking shows a degree of insight and maturity. Like, we're really impressed with this person. It really works well. Here's a mnemonic, right? It's 25 years of wisdom have gone into these 5 words, right? It took 25 years for me and a friend of mine to come up with this mnemonic. So you are now benefiting from 25 years of experience. These are what we call the 5 Ps. Most of the time, when you're working on a project, when you're trying to solve a problem, when you're interviewing, the tendency is to think and work in this direction, from the bottom up, right? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what these things mean. Principles are a set of shared values or beliefs, right? It has a lot to do with culture, philosophy, the soul, the heart. People, obviously, who they are and the skills they bring. Priorities, what is the company working on first, second, third, fourth? How are they doing it? And then what are they building out of all of that? People tend to think and work in this direction. You're working on a product. Okay, that sounds great. I love that product. It sounds interesting. Okay, how are we going to do it? And you start building, you start working, and then maybe 5 weeks in, you realize you were working on the wrong thing. That's not the priority. Maybe it's something else. And then you realize you don't have the right people with all the right skills, and all the people that are on board, they all have slightly different values, and they're rowing in slightly different directions. It's just bass-ackwards. This is not the way to think and work, but it's the easiest. And when you interview, what do you talk about all the time? The product. Oh, we're going to have you work on this great project, and it's going to be this great product, because that's the most tangible, easiest thing to talk about. It's really, really hard to assess culture. How are you going to assess a company's culture in a half-day interview? You got to figure it out. You got to do your research, but it is possible. So we try to work everything from the top down. We have a set of principles that we've defined for our team, a shared sense of values, right? We are the humble experts, for example. We talk about things like success through relationships. The ends don't justify the means, right? We don't want to say, oh yeah, look at this project, it was super successful, I got the design that I wanted, but you left a trail of blood behind you, right? And nobody wants to work with you ever again, right? Because you don't know how to be pragmatic or how to compromise or negotiate or etc. So there's a set of values. When you interview and you're talking about to members of a design team, ask them, what are your values? What are your cultures like? What's your philosophy? What do you believe in? Right? How do you think of design? Do they have any? Or they go, I don't know. That's a sign if they don't have any. And who are they hiring? What kind of people? And do they understand what their priorities are? If you have the same set of values, you know that people are moving in the same direction. You get the right people working on the right thing in the right way to create great products. It works this way. And if you're working on a project, think about it this way too. Don't think about it from the bottom up. What are the goals? What are the problems that we're solving? How are we going to do it? Who do we need to get on board? Are we working on the right thing? What are those priorities? How are we going to do it? And that all of this will lead to a much better solution. But it is a top-down kind of approach. When you interview, it's the same thing. You should be looking for all of these things. I've worked at companies that do really well with one of the P's or a couple of the P's and really bad with the others, et cetera, et cetera. I've had the good fortune of all the different companies I've worked at. Some of them had really, really great products, but really, really bad culture. Some of them have had really, really good culture and great people, but really kind of insignificant, boring products. And I've had all of these mixes, and so I've had a chance to look back and think to myself, okay, since no one company is ever going to be perfect at all 5 of these things, if I had to make a trade-off, where would I be happy, right? And it's a very personal answer for me, and it may be very different for you. But I found that a company that has the right culture and the right people makes all the difference regardless of everything else. And that's why you got to when you interview and you do everything else, you got to start at the top, even though they're always going to talk about this. And they're going to pull you in because they're working on some cool product. I've worked on some really, really cool products. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but at Microsoft we worked on the Play Table, 360-degree multi-touch, right? Everybody's sitting around it. A fantastic product, but it was 2 years of hell. The internal politics and the backstabbing and everything else. Every morning I got up and I was like, I got to go into work today. I hate it. But the product was cool, but the culture and the people and everything else, smart, talented people, but just the environment and the politics just killed it every day. Worked at another company at Belkin. The products are like, all right, a case for an iPhone and this and that, and the products were, but the culture and the people were fantastic, and I've never been happier. It was just awesome. Loved getting up and going to work every day. Microsoft pulled me in with a great product and then killed me with bad culture. Belkin pulled me in with great people and culture, and I got bored to death with the products, but I was happy. It's a mix, right? And whatever's right for you. By the way, if you ever get to interview with the head of design, ask them for their job definition and see how much they talk about these 5 things. to me, this is the definition of my job as VP of UX at Roku. My job is to make sure we have the right type of culture for the team, I hire the right people, they know what to work on, and we've got a great process for delivering great products, right? This is my job definition. This is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
So Ali, I actually have a question for you. So for individuals like me who are so young in their career, how can we formulate our principles, and especially how can we communicate that to people that we are hiring?
Right.
So I believe that every person that joins a team needs to figure this out so they can make sure they're joining the team that shares their values and principles. And you can bring yours and augment, modify. You can be a change agent. It's tough, right? You're talking about beliefs. How do you change someone's beliefs, right? It's tough. But wouldn't you want to know what you're getting into? Wouldn't you want to know if you're getting into a design team that believes X and you believe Y and they're fundamentally different? If you don't talk about these things, you know what it's like? I'll give you an analogy. It's like you're dating someone. You don't want to get married before you find out what kind of religion and how many kids they want, right? And you're like, whoa, wait a minute, and then all of a sudden you realize you're incompatible in ways you've never talked about. Like, that seems kind of absurd and a little bit ridiculous, but it is kind of like that. This is going to make it tough for you when you go out because you're hungry for a job and you're thinking, I'll take whatever job I can get, but yes, the answer wasn't great here and the person didn't give me a good definition of this, but can I live with it? Maybe I should just get the experience and find my... This is going to be tough. This is not going to be easy. And you may not have your pick of the litter, right? It's not like you're going to sit there and go, this job. It's not going to be quite that easy. I know it's going to be tough. But practice, learn. Even if you go somewhere where you're not entirely happy, make the best of it. What are you going to learn? What are you going to get out of it? How do you make yourself more valuable for the next job? And what are you going to think about and learn and do, and et cetera, et cetera. But have them talk to you about their principles. I do that. Every new team member that we hire, I sit down for 2 hours and I sit there and I talk to them about our principles. This is how we operate as a team, right? I talk to them about humility. I talk to them about what does it mean to be a humble expert, right? You don't just go up and say, this is the design and I said so because I'm the designer and that's what you do. Like, I'll fire that person, right? We don't work that way. Principles of inclusion, right? For example, yes, we're designers, we know how to do things, but if we don't include the engineers, the PMs, and all the other departments along the way, it just makes the job that much tougher. You don't get buy-in, and you're missing out on a lot of smart people's great ideas and feedback, right? So we believe in inclusion. And we got a whole host of principles. I'm not going to bore you with them, but we have them, right? And whether they're right or wrong, they're ours. That's what we believe in, and that's how we operate, and that's how we hold each other accountable. But, other places should have something similar. Sometimes it's spoken, sometimes it's unspoken, but I think spoken is better. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. We're running out of time. But you guys can pick and choose whatever you want to talk about if you want. But here's some other things for you to think about when you're interviewing. When you're interviewing them to see if they are a good fit for you, right? Where does design sit in the organization? That'll tell you something about design. Who does it report up to? What's the highest level designer within the company? All of these questions are giving you a sense of the level of commitment and investment to design by that company. We talked about whether it's centralized. Do they have a budget? How big is the budget? Maybe they won't give you a number, but maybe they'll give you a percentage. Oh, it's a percent, it's X percent of blah, 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 right? Do they even have a budget? How big is the team? That gives you a sense of the investment the company's making. How diverse is the team, right? How many different disciplines are there? Are they all a jack of one trade? Are they all hybrid designers, or do they actually have researchers and prototypers and animators and sound designers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It speaks to the level of sophistication and design maturity of that company. Ask them, they're going to ask you, what is your process? How are you going to do design? And when you finish giving them your answer, ask them, okay, how do you do product development? What's your process like? And what are the typical deliverables coming out of your design team, and et cetera? See what they say, and whether that, once again, fits with your expectations. Here's a big one. If a designer says X and the PM doesn't agree, the product manager doesn't agree with what's being designed or proposed, how do you resolve that conflict? Who's the ultimate decision maker? That's going to speak volumes to the level of design commitment by that company. We have product managers who constantly, not in a form of kind of not being malicious or not being no ill intent. It's just the way they think, and it's the different companies they come from. They come and they say, okay, here's the definition of the feature or the product we're going to design, and included in that is a lot of how and a lot of pre-baked solutions. And we send it back all marked up and red, and we're like, just tell us the what and the why. We'll figure out the how, right? And any solution you have in there, we mark as, for example, right? We don't want them telling us what the solution is. We want them telling us the goals, the problems, the requirements, the what's and the whys. We'll figure out the how. And then we propose the solutions, and they can review it and critique it in relation to the problem, the requirements, the goals. All good questions, and many more, once again, to give you a sense of the design maturity of the company. Last but not least, be careful what you negotiate for. We've had a lot of people come in, strong, talented people, good negotiators too. They want that higher title, they want that greater pay. And if you can get it, more power to you, and that feels like success, right? Like if I can get a higher role, a higher title, or more money or more pay, that's good, right? How could there possibly be a downside or a bad side to that? Well, the unintended consequence, what you may not realize, is that with that higher title, with that higher pay, comes higher expectations. And if you're not ready to perform, to deliver against it, they're not going to say, well, you're not really performing, how about we lower your title or lower your pay? It's like, no, you're out the door. At least that's how it is with me. If you come in and you negotiate from a manager to a director, and you're like, I got to be a director, and I got to get this and that, and I'm like, okay, you really think you can pull this off? And I think you can. I'm not going to hire you wondering if you can. I got to believe that you can, but then you got to deliver. And if you don't deliver, there's no second chance. There's not like, hey, why don't we take you down to the manager level? I think you'll be more. No, it doesn't work that way. At least not with me. Maybe somewhere else. So be careful what you negotiate for. And if you go into a small company, a startup, sometimes they allure you with great titles. Come on in. I know you don't have any experience, but you'll be the VP of UX. It'll be great. And so what do you show on your resume? VP of UX. How the hell are you going to find another job somewhere else starting with VP of UX? It just doesn't work. People, we read right through it. We're like, oh, this person's got 5 years of experience and they're VP of UX. It's like, no, I don't think so. Right? Be careful, right? Resist, like, no, thank you. I'll settle for, a senior designer or something like that, right? Look at your own experience level. Look at a title that comes with a role and level of responsibility you know you will be successful at. And yes, it is good to stretch. I'm not saying don't stretch. Take that step a little bit ahead of perhaps where you can be. That's fine too, but don't overstep. Don't overreach. Let your own value and worth kind of act as your promotion. A lot of people jump around from job to job because every time they jump, they get a little raise, they get a little bit of title promotion, et cetera, and within 5 years they're at this, and you're like, okay, I have a hard time believing that 5 years experience got you to this position or this role. I mean, smart employers will just read right through it, and it's a little bit ridiculous. And then the consequence to you is you now have to explain why you went from, director or VP to senior designer in your next job. It's like, okay, what happened? How do you explain that, right? What you want is a resume that looks like this, not a resume that looks like this, right? As a hiring manager, when somebody comes in and has negotiated a much higher salary, it's just human nature right? I'm not an evil person. It's just human nature. I look at the job that you're performing. I look at your performance, and I go, and I look at this person's performance, and that person on my team, and that person on my team, and I go, are you outperforming them? Because I know you're making more money than that person. And if you're not outperforming them, you're out. Be careful what you negotiate for, right? I'm not trying to scare you away. I'm just saying the end result is not always to have the highest title or the most amount of money, right? Know your own worth, know your own value. You may not know what others are making, but the hiring manager knows everybody's salary, and it's just human nature to sit there and do a little comparison, right? And sometimes they'll start boosting other people, or sometimes they'll say, I'm sorry, you're not performing to the title or the pay. We got to part ways. All right, I think we're getting to the end here. One last thing here to talk about. You're going to leave, and you're going to go out there and you're going to interview, and you're going to talk about all your great technical skills. I'm here to tell you that only counts for 50% of your qualifications. There's another 50% that nobody seems to understand or realize how important it is, and it's what we call professional soft skills. If you get a chance, go read a book. It's called Emotional Intelligence, EQ, right? Small book, easy to read. It talks about how if you have the right level of emotional intelligence, that could help you in your career, that can help you fast track much better than any level of IQ. And emotional intelligence is something you can learn, something you can practice and get better at. And it has a lot to do with these professional soft skills. Your communication skills, your diplomacy, your pragmatism, your negotiation, your ability to create social capital. What does that mean? When you build relationships with engineers and product managers and other people, marketing people, and the people that you're working with, you're building up social capital. And then you can spend that capital to win in debates and arguments and things like that. But you got to build it up first. If you don't know the engineer that you're working with, you're just a designer to them, they're just an engineer to you, the potential for conflict is much higher. If you know that person, if you've had lunch with them, if you've gone out, and if you know whether they're married or not, or whether they're a dog or a cat person, they become human. The potential for conflict reduces. You just have great discussions and great debates, but it's not personal, right? It's just different. It's more successful for some reason. That's the value of social capital as well. These professional soft skills, when we interview for technical skills and professional soft skills. We want to make sure that this person has the skills it takes to operate within an organization, human to human, person to person. Are they a good communicator? Are they a good listener? Are they inclusive? Are they tolerant? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These things never come through on a resume. How are you going to tell somebody, an employer, about your great professional soft skills? Are you good at negotiation? Are you good at diplomacy? Are you a good listener? What's your philosophy and approach to conflict resolution? How do you deal with conflict, right? These are all professional skills. How are you going to communicate this to an interviewer? It comes through in your cover letter. It comes through in your conversations with them. Your resume will speak for itself in terms of your skill and your experience and the products you worked on, but you need to write them a letter, a personal letter, and explain to them who you are. What makes you different beyond just your technical skills? I'm a people person. I love teamwork. What is it about you and these softer skills that doesn't come through on the technical side? This is very valuable. An employee who doesn't value this might not be a good fit. An employer who doesn't recognize the value of this may not be a good fit. This is really key. We've got designers with super design skills. No engineer wants to work with them because they're just prima donnas. It's like, okay, what am I going to do with you? I can't stick you in a cave. I can't have all of your design work presented by someone else. If you don't have these professional soft skills, I don't care how good your skill is, it's just not going to work. We've let people go who didn't have the right technical skills, and we've let people go who had great skills but didn't have the professional soft skills. This is really, really important. You've got to find a way to let your employer know who you are as a human being and why you're special, why there should be chemistry between you and the team or the employer. Don't sit there and just review your resume and your technical experience and your project experiences. How did you work with your team members? How did you resolve conflict? What was special about your approach and your communication skills and technique, et cetera, et cetera? This is really good. This is the human side of you. Anything to add on that? We're good? And of course, you're from UCSD, so speak to the human sciences side of what you're doing. Speak to the value of your education and what's unique and what you have to offer. Every time I've worked with a recruiter, a professional recruiter, somebody I work with who helps me find the right job, the best recruiter I ever worked with always asked me one simple question. They said, Ali, what makes you so special? What makes you so different from everybody else out there? Can you please write a page on what makes you unique and different? I'm like, okay, a page. I'm sitting there, and for weeks he's like, no, I'm not out there job hunting for you until you finish this exercise. And it really made me sit down and think, like, what in the hell makes me unique, right? From all of you, from everybody else I'm working with. Is it a combination of my unique experiences? Is it my personality? Is it my philosophy? What is it? And when I finally figured it out for myself and I had a good answer for him, he's like, that's fantastic. Create a paragraph, put that at the top of your resume. Take the longer version, put it in your cover letter. And it's made all the difference. It's really, really good. It's a great exercise. All right. That's it. Lots of words of wisdom packed into a short time there. Happy to hang around afterwards and ask questions. Happy to answer questions now as well. Yes?
So thank you for your talk, first of all. I just want to ask, so you mentioned earlier about how it's really difficult to convince many companies about how design is not just about graphic design, it's also about human-centered design, so both about different factors. And it's difficult right now, and I can only imagine how much more difficult it was back then. When you graduated in 1990.
Right.
So what led you to make the decision that you would take the risk to join such a new major and be the pioneer in this whole room on the learning concept? I just want to know about your whole process.
Yeah, so the question was, knowing how difficult it is to sell a company on what interaction design is and the value of it, what made me decide way back in 1990, when it was certainly even more difficult back then to jump into this type of a career or in that line of study. Well, I studied computer science for 4 years. I was about to graduate. I had one more quarter left, and it was compiler construction, which was tough. Don Norman had just moved Cog-Sci out from under psychology into its own department. And I kind of had a little bit of an epiphany that I wanted to be part of something brand new. I wanted to be part of something cutting edge, something very different. And I took a chance, and little did I know that my 4 years at computer science completed then with Cog-Sci was kind of like computer-human interaction, right? So I understood computers and engineers, and I could talk to them really well, and I could understand humans better from a rather unique perspective, right? And then kind of bring the two together for computer-human interaction. But you're right, back then, if it wasn't for my CS degree, I wouldn't have gotten a job because nobody knew what interaction design was, and I didn't have visual design skills. Not once ever did I own Photoshop or Illustrator or open up any of those things. So how do I convince people I'm a designer? So I started off actually as a prototyper. And so my design thinking drove its way in through prototyping, and then little by little kind of did the transformation, right? So I was definitely a driver, not a passenger, and I knew what I was doing. I was going to get into the design team one way or another, and I was going to little by little work my way into doing interaction design. And from the inside, if you're going to be a change agent, right? If you realize that something is not quite right and you're going to accept it for what it is, go in and then try to change things. You can't affect change from the outside. You can't be an outsider and point and go, that's bad, that's awful, whine, complain, nag, and then expect things to change. It just doesn't work. You have to go become an insider. You have to operate within that machinery, within that organization, create some value, right, so that people appreciate what you have to offer within the way they operate and work, and then little by little introduce change, right? You're not, the analogy is, if you think of a building that's supported by these timbers, right, these support beams, right, that represent culture. They're holding up a certain type of culture. If you go in and knock this down, right, the roof's going to fall on you. It's bad for the company, bad for you, etc. But if you go in and say, okay, here's the change that I represent, and you build something right next to it, if this ends up having more value, this will decay away on its own, all by itself, and the roof still stays, right, and nothing caves in on you. You have to be a change agent from the inside. And so it was a lot of patience and a lot of frustration, a lot of education, a lot of selling, a lot of communicating, a lot of little incremental changes. And it's hard because you convince your boss, and you're like, yes, I just convinced them of X, and you win that battle, and 2 years later your boss goes and joins another company, and you get a new boss, and you're like, I got to start all over again. And it's like that with everybody you work with, right? You invest in that relationship, you educate them, and you're making the world a better place as they leave, and then the next people come in and you start it all over again. But it's patience. You just find a way to communicate, and nothing succeeds like success. Get in there, show value, people will want more, and just keep doing it and making it bigger, better, and then eventually, little by little, doing it your way. I mean, we've all been through these kinds of challenges where we've had to sell and educate and defend and justify, and it still exists today. Different companies have different levels of design maturity. But no easy answer, unfortunately. I wish you could just simply take a couple of books with you and tell them to read it, and then they go, oh, totally get it, come on in. Right? It doesn't work that way. You either find somebody that appreciates it and you can join them if you have that luxury and opportunity. Otherwise, you, as John has said, sometimes you just grab the first opportunity to get in, but stay in that driver's seat, right? So that you're doing things consciously. You're not just all of a sudden a victim to the circumstance and the culture of that place, right? Know what you're doing. Understand that it's not quite right. Don't let it get into your soul. Don't let it change who you are and how you think. And then little by little try to affect change. And when they ask for X, you can give them X, but you can also give them Y and Z. And then say, let me tell you why this and this are better, right? That's what I tell a lot of my designers as well. It's like, even if I ask them for something, at the very least, come and give me what I've asked for. And if you've got better ideas and alternative ideas, present those as well, and then convince me why that's better. But if you don't even give me what I asked for and you give me something else, then the conversation starts off rough. Like, you didn't even do it. Did you even listen to what I was saying? Did you even do this? Did you try it, right? So I feel like I'm rambling. Yes?
So also about the difference between UX design and something more graphic design or visual design. It seems like UX design and even cognitive science is very specialized. If you're in the industries, you are aware of it, you know it, but outside of it, people struggle more to understand what it is.
Yes.
And what the differences are
Yep.
between this and just pure graphic design. Maybe someone who studied art or something like that.
The military gets it. NASA gets it. Government gets it. I mean, for some reason, for as slow as some of those companies can be, they actually understand human factors engineering and human sciences and the science of design. They actually get it. It took a long time for the commercial companies to catch on.
Yeah, so my question is just, how much do you think this is in the process of becoming more understood by maybe more general public, I guess, who are not specifically working with it? And how much does that matter? Because, for example, I'm from Spain. Most of my family doesn't understand cognitive science.
Yeah, no. My mom used to, for the longest time, call me a computer psychologist.
Yeah. They think I want to be a therapist.
Yeah.
They don't know. So
Yeah.
how much would you say that matters really, as long as you're working with people who understand it or not?
Yeah, I don't know if the general public understanding it is critical. I think they just care about the end product, right? They don't care necessarily how it was designed or developed or who did it. There was a theory, and I'm not sure it's accurate. Somebody once said that any particular discipline takes 30 years to establish itself. 30 years. 10 years in academia, right? 10 years working its way into commercial, and then 10 years for somebody in that field to work their way into management. And it's not until you've worked your way into management does it become an established discipline within that industry, right? I don't know if maybe that's true. Because certainly when I graduated in 1990, I think user-centered system design, as Don originally called it, was in academia for a while, right? And then the next 10 years, it was working its way into commercial industry. And you could argue 2000 to 2010-ish, more and more of us started getting our way into becoming managers, directors, VPs, right? Why is that critical? Because as soon as we're in hiring positions, then we know what to look for, right? I don't know if the timing is exactly right, but I think you are now benefiting from interaction design, human-centered design, human sciences working their way into design, having gone through those 3 stages already. Not every company, for sure, but at least it's out there in some form or fashion. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, we have to wrap up pretty soon. The room reservation ends.
Okay.
Can you take one more question and then wrap up?
Sure.
That work?
Yeah. And we're happy to take anybody else's questions in the hallway or at the design lab. I think we've got pizza.
So my question
Pizza.
is, when you mentioned writing a page about yourself.
Yes.
I'm sitting here and trying to think of that for myself, and I can't think of anything.
It's tough.
Is it okay? You don't have to. If you could share what your paragraph was.
What my paragraph was? Yeah, so as I sat there and kind of reflected on what I thought was unique about me, I looked at a little bit of my career, I looked at a little bit about what I learned. I thought the science of design approach and thinking was kind of unique. Everybody that I talked to, they were like, oh yeah, this is interesting, tell me more. And I do, and when I go on interviews, I actually talk to people about my philosophy and what I want, and some people are turned off instantly and they go, this is not a good fit, and I'm like, thank you for telling me it's not a good fit. I just spared myself 6 months of potentially, working for you and then realizing afterwards it's not good. And others go, that's totally interesting, that's exactly what we need, we've been missing it. But for me it was and you guys should share as well, so think while I'm talking. For me it was a combination of a couple things. So it was my science of design background. It was the fact that I fortunately got to work on a lot of V1 products, so I was very good at understanding new domains, new territories, kind of unprecedented, I called it terraforming, right? So the first to kind of do the 360-degree UI multi-touch with Surface, the first to do air gestures and voice type interfaces with Xbox, the first to do self-checkout systems with NCR, the first to, I had a lot of firsts. And I don't think it was necessarily a conscious, maybe it was a subconscious, or maybe it was one of those paths. I set myself on a path, and every employer said, oh, you've done a lot of V1, we got a V1, and then they look for you and they hire you, right? So my career is kind of littered with a lot of V1s. And then I found that I had a good ability of kind of orchestrating design, research, and innovation. Like how do those 3 things relate to each other, and how to set up a successful program to take advantage of those 3 things. So I began to market and brand myself as the orchestrator of innovation, research, and design, and more specifically the science of design, who does really well in V1 situations. I had a story to tell, right? And I think that's what you need, a way of talking about yourself beyond just what's on your resume. A friend of mine, by the way, just a little anecdote, a friend of mine found a really great way to tell his story. He charges now $10,000 a day for his services. And he gets hired by companies all the time. $10,000 a day for him to go and consult and so he can tell them what to do. Yeah, he used to report to me. And he like my career went like this, his career went like, he just found a better way to talk about himself and what was unique about what he had to offer. And people bought into it, and he delivered too, right? Did you have anything to?
I just want to say it's very hard to talk about oneself, right? Like,
Yeah.
like you said, it took you a week to think about what do you need to put on that paper, right? And you had experience, we're talking about now, right? Like maybe last job, right? But if you're coming out of college, maybe you don't have that V1 experience, right?
Right.
But dig deep, right? Think about the projects that you've done in the design lab or in the engineering department or the people you worked with. Or if you've taken an engineering class, maybe you can say you have a perspective that you can bring in as a designer because you have taken this class. Or ask your professors, when you go to office hours, what differentiates you from the 100 students in the class, right? Because maybe you're the one who asks questions and the entire auditorium is quiet, right? So there are things that you may not think of yourself, but ask your peers and also ask your professors to help you out, to get you started. And then once you get that first job and second, then you can start to reflect, like how you talked about, on the products and other things that shape you up. And also the gentleman from Spain, I had the same problem of explaining to my family what is cognitive science. In Europe, they didn't get it back in 2003, right, or 2000. It's a moment of education, right? You take that opportunity to educate, be that, like Ali said, changing agent, right? Let them know what is cognitive science. Let them know what kinds of jobs are out there for us, right? We're not going to be therapists. We might, right, if we go down that path, but we can also be, UX engineers and researchers, et cetera. Right? So use it as an opportunity to educate the public. People help all of us.
Every opportunity you have to communicate or explain something is an opportunity for you to refine your message. What resonated? What did they hear? What did they understand? What did they take away? Oh, they missed this part? Let me change the message. And you try it again the next time, and you try it again. All right? I was refused a job at one point because they said my answers were too perfect. That they felt like I was a salesman or that I was hiding something or slick. And I was just like, well, it just blew my mind. I'm like, yeah, you had an answer for everything and it was so well communicated. And I'm like, but you don't understand. I've been doing this for like 10 years trying to explain everything to somebody. And they were like, oh, it just kind of scared us almost that you were, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with that. But yes, use every opportunity you can to, don't sit there and go, I got to do it again. It's like, oh, I get to practice again. All right, how am I going to do it? Let me try it this way. Let me try it that way. What resonated? What didn't? Change the message, refine it, et cetera. And you'll get better and better and better at it. 50% of design is communication, right? If you can't communicate and you can't educate, you can't sell, you can't defend, you can't justify, then I've seen many, many great designs fail because the designer didn't know how to properly communicate what was being proposed. Communication is a huge, important professional soft skill. All right, I think we have to wrap it up, yes?
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for all the questions.